Welcome to the second lesson of the third unit. The lesson is entitled Some Considerations on Why Miscommunication Happens. The objectives set for this lesson are: get familiar with the barriers in communication, examine how miscommunication occurs in cross-gender interactions, avoid communication failures. If we know what makes an act of communication successful, why do communication failures still occur? Let's pause for a while the video and think. Write down in your notebook the last time you had an argument with somebody. Put down what you said and how your addressee reacted. Say what the reason for that miscommunication was. Just like the previous time, please consider using the verbs feel, behave, and listen while explaining the reason. So how often have you explained in the middle of a heated argument you just don't understand? Who was your addressee? Who bore the responsibility for not being able to understand what the other meant? Was it the interlocutor? Was it you? Was it the socio-cultural norms imprinted on your implicit memory? Was it your inability to express your ideas appropriately? Was it the interlocutor's inability to decode the intended message appropriately? Such questions seldom arise during the argument, as the speakers are too much engrossed in showing why the other is wrong and why they are right. Most probably they are not addressed in the aftermath of the argument either. It is much easier to put the blame on the other than actually getting to the root of the problem. It does not require much mental effort to decide that the other was in the wrong, whereas finding the blunt answer to the problem might be more discomforting and time-consuming than fretting over how unjust the other was. People generally start from the assumption that the way they encode the intended message will be decoded with great ease by the interlocutor. They want the interlocutor to walk in their shoes without even considering that the interlocutor's shoe preferences and size could radically differ from theirs. Sometimes they might even expect from them to be mind readers without necessarily believing in mind reading in real life. And so they argue. Deborah Tannen, the famous American sociolinguist, has researched the issues men and women encounter while communicating and has arrived at interesting conclusions. It looks like it has to deal with the different conversational styles men and women have. Men look for independence and would react whenever they think their power is threatened, hence their turns in communication appear to be rather defensive, as if they participated in a contest where they have to win at all costs. Women, on the other hand, look for intimacy and would look for ways of connecting and showing support and confirmation. Hence, their communication focuses on reaching a consensus. This is why men tend to be perceived as more straightforward and even dominant, whereas women appear to be more amiable, sometimes even giving the wrong impression of taking a subordinate position. The difference in men's and women's conversational styles could be traced back to their childhood, when they learned to use language to communicate. They implicitly acquired the strategies socio-culturally attributed to characterize men and women. One does not teach a child to adopt a style that would reaffirm their dominance or one that would seek to create connections. It is the environment, the context in which the child grows up that contributes to the development of their styles. Children grow up believing that big boys don't cry and that girls are emotional. Probably it should come as no surprise that when boys grow up, they engage in report talk, seemingly showing little emotional engagement. Women, however, engaged in rapport talk, which underlies their desire to emotionally connect. As a result, men might appear cold and even rude, whereas women might appear needy, and even insecure. What a man would offer as a solution to a problem, a woman might interpret it as lack of sympathy merely because she was looking for confirmation of her feelings. She did not need advice, for example, she merely needed understanding. Similarly, a woman's turn in conversation showing support can be interpreted as a threat to a man's independence. Such situations can escalate into big conflicts merely because men's and women's default systems were set in different ways in their early childhood. Consequently, they end up interpreting the messages in the wrong way. Deborah Tannen states that communication is a continual balancing act, juggling the conflicting needs for intimacy and independence. It would probably result in success if only people became aware of the existing differences in their perceptions. If men realized that the communicated message is not an attempt at undermining their authority, and women understood that the intended message does not disregard their feelings, probably so many conflicts would be averted and maybe relationships saved. Yet the egocentrism of each individual seems to prevent them from reaching such an agreement. So misunderstandings, scandals, and grudges could be avoided if only people knew that the socio-cultural filters enacted in the process of communication form barriers preventing one to successfully realize their communicative intention. These filters are deeply rooted in people's unconsciousness, who interact being fully convinced that their intentions will be appropriately decoded. It comes as no surprise that the bitter feeling of disappointment can come over them. Even the fleeting sensation that they have finally managed to make themselves fully understood is rather an illusion. Moreover, instead of destroying the illusion, people seem to foster it. We can recall here George Bernard Shaw's quote, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." The quote might sound paradoxical, yet is not as self-contradictory as it appears at first. People definitely communicate to achieve various aims. It doesn't matter whether they try to persuade others to agree with them or to make them behave in a certain way. They want their communication to be successful. There is not a single person who would engage in an act of communication wanting to fail to achieve their communicative goals. However, it is how they do it that counts. A particular role is given to what kind of preconceived beliefs they involved in the encoding process and in decoding process respectively. It is essential to note that misunderstandings do not happen once the message is uttered. It is the preconceived beliefs in the process of encoding that also contributes to communication failures. These preconceived beliefs form the filters that tend to actually hamper the interlocutor's success in communication. Think about the Instagram filters. Do they convey the accurate representation of a picture? If you apply, let's say, the Hudson filter to your picture, will that still be you? How close will be that to reality? We apply similar filters to our communication process, but when the interlocutors decode the messages, they apply their own filters. Probably we should not look for easy solutions, nor should we rush to hasty conclusions when we misunderstand someone's communicative intentions or when we are misunderstood. We should learn to detach from our egos and try to see what is being communicated to us from the sender's perspective. It does not necessarily mean that we should agree with what we are told. What it means is that we have done our best to interpret the message as accurately as possible. We should bear in our minds that the process of communication is heavily influenced by the socially acquired filters. Probably we shouldn't strive to make our communication filter free, but rather filter aware, which will probably enable us to balance the fundamental needs that we have while trying to achieve success in communication. Now, we've examined just filters related to gender, but there are many other filters out there, like, for example, religious, national, political, age-related, so on and so forth. Lunenburg speaks about three main barriers which might negatively affect the communication process. Physical barriers are the first major source of noise that might prevent the speaker from fully realizing their objectives. The second barrier is semantic, that is, the words might be poorly chosen and as a consequence misrepresent the point the speaker intends to make. Finally, there are psychosocial barriers where the participants' experiences, attitudes, and feelings interfere with the understanding of the message. It should also be mentioned here that the inability to communicate intrapersonally might also be considered a barrier to interpersonal communication. It is important to remember that while communicating, people engage in an act of collaboration in order to achieve success in communication. This is why effective communication should consider carefully the factors affecting the process of encoding the message. Indeed, being aware of the possible barriers impeding the clear understanding of the message helps avoid communication breakdown. Both the addresser and the addressee should be responsible for the choices they make while communicating so that they avoid the barriers that might affect the understanding of the message. Another sure way to avoid communication failure is to follow the politeness principles as defined by Paul Grice, which means that the communicator should follow the principles of quality, that is to be true, quantity to be brief, relevance to be relevant, and manner, that is to be perspicuous. Finally, good communicators should follow the rules formulated by Robin Lakoff and keep in mind that during their interaction they should not impose, instead they should give options and make their addressees feel good. Now, what are some lesson takeaways? Miscommunication can happen because of the various barriers that can fall into three main groups: physical, semantic, and psychosocial. Arguments can result because of the social filters both the addressee and the addresser have acquired. Being aware of the different conversational styles can help avoid communication failure. Women are believed to seek intimacy and connection in their talk, whereas men claim their status and power in their talk.